Hi, and welcome back to Spooky Readings. In this episode, I'm going to be reading a short story called The Haunted Cellar, which is by, I've already forgot what his name is, by Thomas Crofton Croker. So this story is taken from Irish Ghost Stories, the book I've been reading from. This beautiful volume has been published by Macmillan Press, so you can find all of the stories, this edition, through them. Now, just a quick little bit about today's episode. As you can see, if you are watching rather than listening, we have changed locations for today's episode. Yeah, I have been a little bit unwell this week. I'm feeling much better, but I decided to be a little bit more comfortable, and I decided to film this episode a bit more earlier in the day than I usually would because I want a nice long night's rest to recover just a little bit more, and then I'll be 100% again. Now, just a little bit about Thomas Crofton Croker. Now, he lived in the years 1798 to 1854, and he was from Cork. So his work is mainly in collecting ancient Irish poetry and folklore. And this story, The Haunted Cellar, is, the book says here, is told in anecdotal fashion. Whether this is because there is an element of truth in the yarn or the author wishes to create that impression, one cannot say. Don't we just love a story that you don't know whether it's 100% true or not? Like, those make some of the best stories, I think. Also, if you are watching rather than listening, apologies for any camera wobbles. My tripod is on my bed, so whenever I move, there's just going to be a little bit of a wobble in today's episode. All right. Well, it's a nice short one, so let's get started. Thomas Crofton Croker's The Haunted Cellar. There are few people who have not heard of the McCarthys, one of the real old Irish families, with the true Milesian blood running in their veins as thick as buttermilk. Many were the clans of this family in the south, as the McCarthy-Moore and the McCarthy, and the McCarthy of Muskerry. And all of them were noted for their hospitality to strangers, gentle and simple. But not one of that name, or any other, exceeded Justin McCarthy of Ballinaccarthy, at putting plenty to eat and drink upon his table, and there was a right hearty welcome for everyone who should share it with him. Many a wine cellar would be ashamed of the name if that at Ballinaccarthy was the proper pattern for one. Large as that cellar was, it was crowded with bins of wine and long rows of pipes and hogsheads and casks that it would take more time to count than any sober man could spare in such a place, with plenty to drink about him and a hearty welcome to do so. There are many, no doubt, who will think that the butler would have little to no complaint of in such a house, and the whole country round would have agreed with them. If a man could be found to remain as Mr. McCarthy's butler for any length of time worth speaking of, yet not one who had been in his service gave him a bad word. "We have no fault," they would say. to find with the master, and he could but get anyone to fetch his wine from the cellar, we might every one of us have grown grey in the house and have lived quiet and contented enough in his service until the end of our days. "'Tis a queer thing, that, surely," thought young Jack Leary, a lad who had been brought up from a mere child in the stables of Ballinaccarthy to assist in taking care of the horses, and had occasionally lent a hand in the butler's pantry. "'Tis a mighty queer thing, surely, that one man after another cannot content himself with the best place in the house of a good master, but that every one of them must quit, all through the means, as they say, of the wine cellar. If the master, long life to him, would but make me his butler, I warrant never the word more would be heard of grumbling at his bidding to go to the wine cellar." Young Leary accordingly watched for what he conceived to be a favourable opportunity of presenting himself to the notice of his master. A few mornings after, Mr. McCarthy went into his stable yard rather earlier than usual and called loudly for the groom to saddle his horse, as he intended going out with the hounds. But there was no groom to answer, and young Jack Leary led Rainbow out of the stable. Commendable horse name, Rainbow. It's a bit My Little Pony-esque. "Where is William?" inquired Mr. McCarthy. I'm sorry, I know this is an Irish story, but I think Mr. McCarthy's going to sound a bit Scottish in this one, guys. "Sir," said Jack, and Mr. McCarthy repeated the question. "Is William, please?" Oh, wait, wrong character. "Is it William, please, your honour?" returned Jack. "Why, then, to tell the truth, he had just one drop too much last night." "Where did he get it?" said Mr. McCarthy. "For since Thomas went away, the key of the wine cellar has been in my pocket, and I have been obliged to fetch what was drunk myself." "Sorrow I know," said Leary. "Unless the cook might have given him the least taste in life of whiskey, but," continued he, performing a low bow by seizing with his right hand a lock of hair and pulling down his head by it, while his left leg, which had been put forward, was scraped back against the ground, "may I be so bold as to ask your honour one question?" "Speak it out, Jack," said Mr. McCarthy. "Why, then, does your honour want a butler?" "Can you recommend me one?" returned his master, with a smile of good humour upon his countenance, "and one who will not be afraid of going into my wine cellar?" Is the wine cellar all the matter?" said young Leary. "Devil a doubt I have of often, then, for that. I have of myself, then, for that." I'm going to be really honest here and say that some of these sentences aren't quite making sense to me. So if they sound weird, I could be delivering them weird. "So you mean to offer me your services in the capacity of butler?" said Mr. McCarthy with some surprise. "Exactly so," answered Leary, now for the first time looking up from the ground. "Well, I believe you to be a good lad, and I have no objection to give you a trial." "Long may your honour reign over us, and the Lord spare you to us," ejaculated Leary with another national bow as his master rode off, and he continued for some time to gaze after him with a vacant stare which slowly and gradually assumed a look of importance. "Jack Leary," said he at length. "Jack Leary," said he at length. "Jack! Is it Jack?" in a tone of wonder. Faith, 'tis not Jack now, but Mr. John the butler, and with an air of becoming consequence, he strode out of the stable yard towards the kitchen. It is of little purport to my story, although it may afford an instructive lesson to the reader to depict the sudden transition of nobody into somebody. Jack's former stable companion, a poor superannuated hound named Bran, who had been accustomed to receive many an affectionate pat on the head, was spurned from him with a kick and an "out of the way, sirrah." Indeed, poor Jack's memory seemed sadly affected by this sudden change of situation. What established the point beyond all doubt was his almost forgetting the pretty face of Peggy, the kitchen wench, whose heart he had assailed but the preceding week by the offer of purchasing a gold ring for the fourth finger of her right hand, and a lusty imprint of goodwill upon her lips. Ooh, Jack Leary, you naughty, naughty fellow. When Mr. McCarthy returned from hunting, he sent for Jack Leary, so he continued to call his new butler. "Jack," said he, "I believe you are a trustworthy lad, and here are the keys of my cellar. I have asked the gentlemen with whom I hunted today to dine with me, and I hope they may be satisfied at the way in which you will wait on them at the table. But, above all, let there be no want of wine after dinner." Mr. John, having tolerably quick eye for such things, and being naturally a handy lad, spread his cloth accordingly, laid his plates and knives and forks in the same manner he had seen his predecessors in office perform these mysteries, and really for the first time got through attendance on dinner very well. It must not be forgotten, however, that this was at the house of an Irish country squire, who was entertaining a company of booted and spurred fox hunters, not very particular about what are considered matters of infinite importance under other circumstances and in other societies. For instance, a few of Mr. McCarthy's guests, though all excellent and worthy men in their way, cared much whether the punch produced after soup was made of Jamaica or Antigua rum. Some even would not have been inclined to question the correctness of good old Irish whiskey, and with the exception of their liberal host himself, everyone in company preferred the port which Mr. McCarthy put on his table to the less ardent flavour of a claret, a choice rather at variance with modern sentiment. It was waxing near midnight when Mr. McCarthy rung the bell 3 times. This was a signal for more wine, and Jack proceeded to the cellar to procure a fresh supply, but it must be confessed, not without some little hesitation. Ooh. The luxury of ice was then unknown in the south of Ireland, but the superiority of cool wine had been acknowledged by all men of sound judgment and true taste. The grandfather of Mr. McCarthy, who had built the mansion of the Ballingacarthy upon the site of an old castle which belonged to his ancestors, was fully aware of this important fact, and in the construction of his magnificent wine cellar had availed himself of a deep vault excavated out of the rock in former times as a place of retreat and security. The descent to this vault was by a flight of steep stone stairs, and here and there in the wall were narrow passages. I ought rather to call them crevices, and also certain projections which cast deep shadows and looked very frightful when anyone went down the cellar stairs with a single light. Indeed, 2 lights did not much improve the matter, for though the breadth of the shadows became less, the narrow crevices remained as dark and darker than ever. Summoning up all his resolution, down went the new butler, bearing in his right hand a lantern and the key of the cellar, and in his left a basket which he considered sufficiently capacious to contain an adequate stock for the remainder of the evening. He arrived at the door without any interruption whatever, but when he put the key, which was of an ancient and clumsy kind, for it was before the days of Brahma's patent, and turned it in the lock, he thought he heard a strange kind of laughing within the cellar, to which some empty bottle that stood upon the floor outside vibrated so violently that they struck against each other. In this he could not be mistaken, although he may have been deceived in the laugh, for the bottles were just at his feet, and he saw them in motion. Leary paused for a moment and looked about him with becoming caution. He then boldly seized the handle of the key and turned it with all his strength in the lock, as if he doubted his own power of doing so, and the door flew open with a most tremendous crash, that if the house had not been built upon the solid rock, it would have shook it from the foundation. To recount what the poor fellow saw would be impossible, for he seems not to have known very clearly himself, but what he told the cook the next morning was that he heard a roaring and bellowing like a mad bull, and that all the pipes and hogsheads and casks in the cellar went rocking backwards and forwards with so much force that he thought everyone would have been staved in, and that he should have been drowned or smothered in wine. When Leary recovered, he made his way back as well as he could into the dining room, where he found his master and the company very impatient for his return. "What kept you?" said Mr. McCarthy in an angry voice. "And where is the wine? I run for it half an hour since." "The wine is in the cellar, I hope, sir," said Jack, trembling violently. "I hope 'tis not all lost." What do you mean, fool?" exclaimed Mr. McCarthy in a still more angry tone. "Why did you not fetch some with you?" Jack looked wildly about him and only uttered a deep groan. "Gentlemen," said Mr. McCarthy to his guests, "this is too much. When I see you to dinner, I hope it will be in another house, for it is impossible. I can remain no longer in this, where a man has no command over his own wine cellar, and cannot get a butler to do his duty. I have long thought of moving from Ballinacathy, and I am now determined, with the blessing of God, to leave it tomorrow. But wine shall you have were I to go myself to the cellar for it." So saying, he rose from the table and took the key and lantern from his half-stupefied servant, who regarded him with a look of vacancy, and descended the narrow stairs already described, which led to his cellar. When he arrived at the door, which he found open, he thought he heard a noise, as if of rats or mice scrambling all over the casks, and on advancing perceived a little figure about 6 inches in height, seated astride upon the pipe of the oldest port in the place, and bearing a spigot upon his shoulder. I have no idea what a spigot is. Raising the lantern, Mr. McCarthy contemplated the little fellow with wonder. He wore a red nightcap on his head. Before him was a short leather apron, which now, from his attitude, fell rather on one side, and he had stockings of a light blue colour, so long as nearly to cover the entire of his legs, with shoes having huge silver buckles on them, and with high heels, perhaps out of vanity to make him appear taller. His face was like a withered winter apple, and his nose, which was of a bright crimson colour, but the tip wore a delicate purple bloom like that of a plum, yet his eyes twinkled like those mites of candid dew in money nights, and his mouth twitched up at one side with an arch grin. "Ah, scoundrel!" exclaimed Mr. McCarthy. "Have I found you at last, disturber of my cellar? What are you doing there?" "Sure, and master," returned the little fellow, looking up with him with one eye and with the other throwing a sly glance towards the spigot on his shoulder. "Ain't we going to move tomorrow? And sure you would not leave your own little cluricone nuggetine behind you?" Oh, I wish I had some more knowledge of Irish folklore, because I have no idea how to pronounce that, and I have no idea what I just said. "Oh," thought Mr. McCarthy, "if you are to follow me, Master N, I don't see much use in quitting Ballynacarthy." So, filling with wine the basket which young Leary, in his fright, had left behind him, and locking the cellar door, he rejoined his guests. For some years after, Mr. McCarthy had always to fetch the wine for his table himself, as the little the little person seemed to feel a personal respect towards him, notwithstanding the labour of these journeys. The worthy lord of Ballynacarthy lived in his paternal mansion to a good round age, and was famous to the last for his excellence of his wine and conviviality. The English words as well. For anyone who English is their second language, no, even if English is your first language, there's still going to be words you can't pronounce. Conviviality of his company. But at the time of his death, the same conviviality had nearly emptied his wine cellar, and as it was never so well filled again, nor so often visited, the revels of Master Naganine became less celebrated, and are now only spoken of among the legendary lore of the country. It is even said that the poor little fellow took the declension of the cellar so to heart that he became negligent and careless of himself, and that he has been sometimes seen going about with hardly a screed to cover him. And that is the haunted cellar. So it wasn't a ghost. I am guessing that the Cluricon is a bit like a leprechaun, maybe. And he definitely was on the grog, with a plum nose. Yes, I was not expecting that to be the ending. I was not expecting it to be such a little trickster in the bottom of the cellar. But I'm glad he had a happy time sampling his master's grog. And with that, that is today's spooky reading. I'm not exactly sure what I'm reading next. I'll figure that out another day. But shortly, soon, hopefully in the next couple of episodes, I'm going to start reading to you some short stories from one of my favorite Japanese folklore books that I have ever read. So stay tuned on the channel for those. And I'm also looking at purchasing some Australian folklore, Australian Gothic folklore. So hopefully I'll be doing that soon. But if you have any stories that are in the public domain that you would like me to read, just let me know, and I'd be more than happy to do an episode of them on my channel here. All right, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, and I'll see you next time on Spooky Readings. Ooh.